Good afternoon. My name is Michael Darren. I'm the Education and Engagement Coordinator for Japan House. Thank you so much for joining us today on our next edition of Japan House Shares. Today, I'm a guest in Anderson Japanese Gardens, located in Rockford, Illinois, just a short trip north of Champaign-Urbana, and if you've never been here, it's definitely worth a visit. We are going to be focusing on the topic of pine tree pruning. This garden was founded in 1978 by John Anderson under the direction of Japanese designer Hoichi Kurisu. And our featured guest today, who will be joining us here in just a little bit, Tim Gruner, the head of horticulture and the garden curator for many years. This garden is a jewel in the Midwest, but Japanese gardens aren't without lots of maintenance. So today we will be learning how to prune mature pine trees in a Japanese style. Can't wait, let's get going. Japanese gardens are inspired by a deep respect for nature, but to say that they are natural would be incorrect. They are works of art that aim to achieve a balance between wildness and control, as well as the balance of nature and the harmonious human cohabitation with nature, of which we are a part. Trees and shrubs are meticulously planted and pruned, not as a show of human dominance, but to reveal an idealized vision of nature that helps us discover our place within it by maintaining a comfortable human scale and reflecting patterns in nature and our connections to it. Although most Japanese gardens contain both evergreen and deciduous plants, there's a greater emphasis on broadleaf and coniferous evergreens. If broadleaf evergreens cannot be grown due to climate, substitutions are made using deciduous trees that emphasize the desired scale, texture, and fall color. Pine trees, known as matsu in Japan, are associated with permanence and longevity. Pines are the most dominant native plant in Japan and the most important tree in Japanese gardens. Each spring, as the new growth appears, the trees are carefully and skillfully sculpted and reshaped into cloud-like clusters called Niwaki. Niwaki are cultivated to achieve very dramatic effects, such as aging the tree, imitating wind-swept environments, and creating a more forest-like mood to the landscape when desired. With over 150 mature pine trees to prune in a limited amount of time, garden curator Tim Gruner leads his team of dedicated gardeners in a vigorous yet delicate pruning frenzy.
I'm Tim Gruner. I've been here at Anderson Japanese Gardens as a member of the garden team beginning in 1989. I was really drawn to this garden. It made me feel like I felt when I was in deep nature, like when I was backpacking in the Smoky Mountains. I had this marvelous feeling come over me of clarity, and it was really extremely informative as to why I'm here, those kind of experiences backpacking. And I remember coming here for the first time as a student in 1985, and I felt that same kind of calmness and clarity sweep over me. And so I was hooked on Japanese gardens, and this garden in particular. And after graduating from Kishwaukee College, a community college with a horticulture degree, worked at the Chicago Botanic Garden as an intern, did a few other things, and I ended up here in 1989 on my first project that I worked on here as the low man on the totem pole was the West Waterfall project, which was a fairly epic scale project. So I've been fortunate to work with under the direction of Hoichi Kurisu the whole time here. He's an amazing human being with marvelous philosophy and a great builder of Japanese gardens. And then along with that, an amazing array of craftsmen and artists that both have worked here and have we become engaged with over the time on various projects, really almost nonstop for the last, well, for my own self, since 1989. Anderson Gardens is really here because of a nice alignment of things in the life of John Anderson, the garden's founder. John and Linda Anderson, actually. It was really a team effort. John had been a student at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and his parents challenged him upon graduation. You can go anywhere you want in the world for 6 weeks. And John graduated and chose to go to Japan, where he was really showed the country by family friends in business in Japan, Mr. Akira Ono of the Morinaga Milk Company. And on that tour of Japan, John really fell in love with the Japanese people and the culture of hospitality, and the Japanese gardens, the way those gardens made him feel. Flash forward from 1966, which is when his visit to Japan occurred, to 1978 on a business trip to Portland, Oregon. Had some extra time. Cab driver took him to the Portland Japanese garden. That same kind of feeling that he experienced in the gardens of Japan, he felt it. And that led to a conversation with Huichi Kurisu, who had been the second director of that garden from 1968 to 1972. Huichi founded his own company in 1972. And in 1978, Huichi Kurisu, who had been trained in Japan by one of the 20th century's great Japanese garden builders in Japan, came here for the first time in 1978 and thought, yeah, this site has great potential, and that set off really what has amounted to over 40 years of collaboration in building and developing this Japanese garden. So this garden is really a garden of multiple styles. If you enter the space from the visitor center, that garden around the visitor center and in what we call the Garden of Reflection is really a contemporary garden with strong Japanese sensibility. Very wide paths, big lawns for events. It was built really as a place for community engagement. Festivals, weddings, concerts, all these sorts of things happen over there. It's a marvelous space for people to enjoy the beauty of nature in the garden and time together. But crossing the creek through the main gate, we enter really what is a more traditional style garden. The building that we're standing in front of here right now, built in 1985 by a Japanese carpenter who specialized in temple repair and traditional style construction. This Skia style architecture is typical of the architecture found throughout the garden. So on this side of the creek, around this space, there are multiple gardens. There's the Karisansui, the raked gravel garden. We've got everything from semi-formal to the very informal space around the tea house. Large waterfalls, big projects have been the hallmark of this garden really since its inception in this continual and gradual both construction and then refinement, continual refinement and evolution of the garden that we have. It was about the year 2007 when John Anderson and a former president of the University of Illinois thought it would be great if somehow we could collaborate on something along with Japan House. And it was then that Professor Kimiko Gunji came up here to visit and actually met Huichi on that trip. And from that, ideas started flowing. It wasn't that long afterwards that we did our first tea ceremonies here at the garden. and with Professor Gunji guiding us along. Those tea ceremonies have now evolved into Anderson Japanese Gardens Tea Study Group, guided by Gunji Sensei, and also other kinds of cultural programming. She's been instrumental in helping guide us in our summer festival, our Japanese summer festival, as well as a number of other cultural offerings, from lectures on Zen aesthetics to the role of tea ceremony in culture. It's been a marvelously productive time, and we're very grateful for our relationship with both Professor Gunji and Japan House and the whole team at Japan House. So we're extremely fortunate for that relationship. Well, people sometimes ask, how do you know what to do with these pine trees, and how do you prune them? Well, really, in this kind of garden, the first step is to plant it in the correct posture in the beginning. And so, in the case of this space, how this tree is planted needs to harmonize with all the other elements, both rocks, architecture, and then the sort of the visual focus of this space. And so this tree has multiple jobs to do. People come from across the bridge. Fundamentally, all the elements in this space direct the viewer over to the opening in the gate. That is like it's kind of like on the pecking order of space, that is the apex space. And so the boulders to my right, the tree to my right, this tree, they all gesture subtly over in that direction. And you can see that when this tree was planted, it's not an accident that it's leaning towards that space. So it's actually leaning that way. The top has a nice crook in it that also gestures in that direction. And then over time, we'll allow these branches on this side to get a little bit longer, because we want them to gesture towards the focal point of the space, which is the opening in the gate. When we approach a pine like this and determine what is our next step in training this tree, there's a few principles that we have to keep in mind. And one of them is just the scale of the individual tree. And in a Japanese garden, the idea is that we are having this, in effect, conversation with nature, and the plants and trees that are not necessarily intended to be overwhelming. The idea is the garden and people existing in a very comfortable way. So plants are on a human scale, so that we feel a part of this environment, that it's not so grand and immense that it dwarfs us, but that we are a part of the physical existence and we belong with it. And in this case, this tree is a great size to reflect that idea. And so why this shape and why this much openness? Well, the basic objective is to create a tree that creates in the viewer the emotional response to a tree of some age in nature. In nature, some basic branching patterns are the trees are more upright in the top, and as the branches descend down the tree, they go from more upright to ever more descending. And ideally, even the lower branches could be, really reflexing towards the ground. It's not easy to do because these are in effect young and stubborn trees. In nature, the bottom branches are responding to the light competition from above. And so they don't grow up, they grow more out and down because that's where the light is. And then when branches get long over time, just the long, as the branch gets heavier and heavier, it starts to weigh itself down. So in effect, it's training itself down just by its basic growth habit. And so we try to emulate those growth habits with the pine trees. And so the idea is stylized, but reflects how trees grow in the wild, in nature. And some of those other principles are you can see through to the trunk, that there's a kind of transparency. You can see the branching structure of the individual, sort of these, we might say clouds. It's a common term to call these like cloud style pruning. But so these clouds, you can see in at the structure so that it's complex. And the idea is that typically the lower trunk is a little more bare, so you can see the trunk of the tree from the primary viewing angle. This tree functions more almost in 360 degrees, so it really has to look good from all directions. Like a bonsai tree that you might see at, say, the Chicago Botanic Garden or at another bonsai collection, they're typically viewed from one angle. But in the garden, while the principles of design are similar to bonsai, really, in a case like this, it has to function in almost 360 degrees. So, nice transparency. You can see the beautiful aging bark. Up in the top, you can see the nice structure gesturing over towards the gate. And each one of these clouds, if you will, it lives in its own space. Just like you might see in really ancient trees in nature. They develop kind of their own compartment where they live. And so that's the sort of thing that we try to emulate with our pruning. In terms of training the pines, in particular the new growth, what we refer to as the candles. So the new buds are elongating, and those buds are referred to as candles. And you really get one shot in the spring in this climate, to manage the growth of these candles. So again, we want to keep these trees, we want to keep their size in balance with the space around them and comfortable to the people that walk through the garden, so that they feel like they are a part of nature, a part of the garden themselves. And in order to do that, we have to keep them in correct scale to all the other elements around them. So in this case, you can see this is a strongly budding tree. This is a Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris. It's a straight species. There's no fancy cultivars or anything. And in this case, this tree is healthy. It's putting out 4 buds per terminal. And so in order to keep these trees light and airy, so that you get good light penetration, and the branches on the inside and down below can all stay alive and healthy, you have to have sunlight in order to do that. And part of the way we do that, to keep that light flowing in, is by removing the strong bud, and then we'll take typically if there's 4, we'll typically take out the 2 strongest buds in the middle, and then leave the less dominant lateral buds. We'll break those off at different lengths, so that it looks irregular over time, and you get the nice sinuous movement through the branches. So when the candles start to elongate, you really get a stretch of about mid-April through May. And then the candles start to harden up and turn into wood, and then it's not recommended in this climate to prune those after that point. So you've got that sort of 6 or 7 week window. And the other thing that we have to do with these trees is thin the growth annually. So not just breaking the candles, but thin each branch of the tree out. If you think about it, if you just take these buds and break them off, you still have twice as many, and have 2 left. You have twice as many as what you started with. Here's 1 branch, 4 buds. Even if you leave just 2, you've got twice as many. So in effect, if you just break the candles, eventually it ends up like you're shearing the tree. So it becomes very dense, the inner buds die, and the lower branches lose energy and slowly decline. So we also have to periodically, and it's really annually, go through and thin the old wood out. So we thin about maybe 20% out each year, and then that allows the tree to sustain roughly at the size that it needs to be through a long period of time into the future. So there's really not that many tools that are necessary to prune a tree like this. Obviously, the ladder, this tripod ladder, which is an orchard ladder, is a key, and that you can get really deeply into the tree with that slender third leg. And then also, because of the three legs, they're stable on uneven ground. As long as these two legs are on flat ground, and you have a good firm spot to put the third leg, you're in pretty good shape. So then, when we climb on ladders, we always wear a helmet to protect our heads in case of a fall, which we avoid at all costs. And then there's the tools that we use. So probably one of the most common ones is the one Ian's using right now, which is a bypass shear made in Japan. There's a number of companies that make them, but that is the basic style right there. And because the long pointy blades, it allows you to get really in close and tight to the candles, and they're easy to see, and it just makes for a nice pruning operation. For bigger branches, then we move in with a stronger bypass style pruner. This is one. Ian, you have one by another company there. They're both made in Japan. Both great tools. But you can see, similar to what like an old Falco number 7 or 8 would be. But this is our preference. Both made in Japan. Very high quality steel. Excellent tools. And so for a little bit bigger branches. Now, so if you need to remove a larger branch, then we have this folding saw, which really with this saw you could take down a 6-inch diameter tree with relative ease. But really great for anything from 1 inches and above. I mean, really, the thing of it is you're pruning a lot, and you want to preserve the structure of your own hand, which is one of your body is one of your primary critical tool. So you can overdo it on branches too big. So sometimes instead of struggling to cut a branch that's a little too big for a pruner, it's better to go in with the saw and use the big muscles of your arm and upper body to take off a branch instead of trying to savage it out of there with a tool that's a little bit undersized. So those are some of the important tools. Areas that get to be hard to reach. This is an extension pruner, a heavy-duty one by a company called ARS that are available in the States. Very high quality, Japanese-made tool. And so with this tool, if you need to, you can reach up pretty high and take care of things that maybe you just can't quite reach from the ladder. So essentially, that is the full arsenal of the tools that we use for pruning. And we typically start from the top of the tree and work our way down, because there's also cleaning that can be done. Dead needles. Sometimes we'll what we call polish the bark, where the loose exfoliating bark is rubbed off with your hands, and it gives the bark a nice clean. And then on Scotch pine, sometimes it gets down into the real nice orange color, which stands out really well out here. But in this case, what Ian's doing with this tree is he's in effect giving it like a quick shear, and then he'll go back in and thin out the candles that don't need to be there. So again, this tree is a little different than some of the other trees, in that the buds are almost maybe only 1 or 2 or 3 on each branch terminal. So he's knocking out the biggest and the worst stuff, and then he'll go through and take out the strongest candle in each little cluster, so that you're in effect you're removing the plant's general direction to grow up as strong as possible. Well, we're trying to keep them in a nice human scale, so that strong, typically center candle in each cluster, that one is taken out. And so Ian will work his way from the top of the tree all the way down, cleaning as he goes, because you can see how the candles from the top fall onto the branches below. So another thing we do to help keep our labor costs down and actually improve garden quality is we use this light netting draped over the foliage. So it makes, you can see all this debris falling in here. It makes it much easier to clean up. And also, without that, these candles that are falling down inside here, if you don't get those all out, if you didn't have the net, they end up being brown and very distracting in a garden that really needs to present as like vital and alive. You don't need all that dead stuff hanging around and things. So this is a really great labor saver and really enhances garden quality in the long run by using them.
Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Japan House Shares. We would definitely like to extend a special thank you to Tim Gruner and his wonderful team here, as well as the Anderson family, for inviting me here today to look at how they maintain this beautiful garden. If you're interested in visiting Anderson Japanese Gardens, please do so. They are open Monday through Sunday, 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. with a reservation required. When you're here, you can enjoy lunch, you can take a leisurely stroll through the garden, and definitely come home inspired. When you're back home in Champaign-Urbana, make sure you come to Japan House Gardens. We're open 365 days a year, sunrise to sunset. Join us next time on Japan House Shares, where we will be visiting with our friends Michael and David, who will be visiting a sencha tea farm in Japan. Thank you so much and enjoy your afternoon.